This is Spirit Gym. Today, Paul is talking with Tom Cronin, founder of the Stillness Project, a global movement to inspire 1 billion people to sit in stillness daily. Tom discovered meditation in the early stages of his 26-year career as one of Australia's leading bond and swap brokers, when the anxiety and chaos he was experiencing had hit a crisis point, and it completely transformed his world both personally and professionally. Tom has 6 books published and produced the hit film, The Portal. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast.
Hello, everybody. I'm sure you heard Penny's beautiful intro about Tom and all of his great accomplishments. Our topic today is life, a spiritual approach. And I found out about Tom when his publicist sent out an email. And when I saw the list of things he had expertise on, I thought, wow, this guy's perfect for Spirit Gym. So Tom, welcome to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and all my amazing guests.
Paul, I'm honored to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
To begin with, Tom, I like my audience to get to know and gain a sense of personal connection to our guests. So can you share an overview of your life and what shaped you into the person you are today, and how you kind of ended up going down the track you're in and creating the documentary you have and writing all your books, just so we can get a sense of what shaped you and who is this guy?
How long have we got? So I'll try and keep it very brief. I break it down into 3 phases, I guess. One was my phase in childhood, where I grew up in a really beautiful, wholesome, nourishing family environment on a farm. So I had a deep connection with nature, a beautiful family unit. It was a very healthy, loving family unit of 7 of us, 5 kids and mum and dad. And it was a really nourishing experience. I had a strong connection with God. We grew up under Catholicism, which I guess was the foundation for this sense of something higher and something deeper and something more profound. And I had a strong connection and communication, I guess, with that higher source. At the time, I thought of as a man in the sky, but there was definitely a sense of connection and communication going on there for me as a young child. And then in my 20s, I became a broker in finance, which was very left field and not something I was expecting to do. And it was 1987, and I was actually meant to do a degree in university in journalism, but I had to make some money because I blew a lot of it while I was traveling after school. And next thing, I landed a job on a trading room floor in finance, and it was very much Wolf of Wall Street. The same year Jordan Belfort started his career, actually, 1987. And that took me down that path of extreme hedonism, extreme narcissism, extreme indulgence, lots of money, lots of fast cars, lots of drugs, drinking, and I couldn't have gotten further from my North Star and my Dharma. And interestingly, the universe is really good at guiding us. And so what started to happen was in that time, I got a lot of anxiety and panic attacks and depression and addictions. And my life was just spiraling into darker and deeper and messier and chaotic states. And eventually that culminated in my late 20s into a full-blown nervous breakdown. I was incapacitated, had to take mental health leave from work, was seeing psychiatrists, doctors, psychologists, put on pharmaceutical drugs, was really kind of suicide ideation at the time, and was a pretty dark time for me. And that's when I came across meditation. And it was a really interesting paradigm shift when I heard about meditation. It was like a light bulb moment. And I went deep down into Eastern philosophy, meditation, mindfulness, transcending into deep meditation, and that was like a game changer for me. And over time, even though I continued on as a broker without all the addictions and anxiety and panic attacks, I eventually left that to become a meditation teacher of all things. So that was like the 3rd phase of my existence, where now I run retreats and I work with some of the top companies teaching meditation, speaking at their conferences, and coaching a lot of clients on how to expand spiritually, to expand their minds, but also some people on how to grow their spiritual businesses as well.
That's a nice journey. And yeah, it seems like most of us tend to go into sort of our younger pursuits of success, materialism. And if we have success, we have the power to get ourselves in trouble, and we explore sex, drugs, rock and roll, and and ultimately it's quite a common path to find that there's an emptiness that gets created as we seemingly have all sorts of material abundance. And we're all familiar with countless movie stars and rock stars and musicians and people like that go through this process and ultimately end up coming to a spiritual path, which seems to be the only thing that really satiates the soul. What that means is you're a wise man now.
Everything about life is to discover our spiritual reality. I think
Yes.
that we get lost on the way, and we get misguided, and we get pulled into things that look appealing and look glamorous and look attractive. But the universe, I feel, is really good at redirecting us, and it does that usually through pain and discomfort and suffering. And I think as a species, we're in that current middle phase that I was in collectively, which is this attraction to physical things and gross things and external things. And I think we're about to go through what I call a rashi in Sanskrit, which is a crisis moment, which is the mechanism evolution and the universe uses to redirect us back to our path as to why we actually became manifest in the first place. So yeah, it's an interesting place where we're at as a species right now.
I think anyone with some spiritual depth has sensed the signs, handwriting on the wall for quite a while. I think if you take humanity and see each person as a cell in the overarching body of humanity, that it goes through its own process, just like a child becoming a teenager, going through an initiation process, just like the native cultures had initiations and rites of passage. Then there's the adulthood phase and etc. And I feel that humanity is now at that teenage stage where it's getting in trouble with everything and tearing shit up and blowing shit up and lying and cheating and drugging. And I feel that we're unconsciously calling ourselves into a real initiation process where we gain a sense of clarity on what is ultimately meaningful and what is really important to focus on. I'm curious, how do you feel intuitively that this crisis may manifest itself?
I'd love to think that we can avoid the crisis and go through that chrysalis, that transformation, that alchemy, without something extremely turbulent. But I doubt that's going to happen. The possibility is there because the mere fact alone that you're in Southern California and I'm in Sydney and we're having this conversation, there's probably people all over the world listening to this conversation. That wasn't happening 20 years ago. We didn't have podcasts. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have YouTube. So the fact that we can spread this information, people can listen to this information, people can learn and evolve. And the mere fact that we have 100 million people currently subscribing to the Calm app, and, even though a lot of them might be listening to Matthew McConaughey reading them bedtime stories, but the fact is that we've got people moving in that direction. And we're seeing this gradual phase shift unfolding simultaneously with potentially moving towards a crisis moment. And we cover this in our film, how we're seeing exponential levels of growth. It's quite phenomenal, the level of evolution that's happening on the planet, with more people getting access to education and more people getting access to healthcare and food, more people learning about spiritual practices, plant medicine, meditation, ice plunges. It's phenomenal how much is just exploding in the health, wellness, and spiritual world. But simultaneously, we're seeing exponential levels of decay and the erosion of the fabric of our society in many ways as well. And the capacity for technological destruction through, obviously, war or AI or all sorts of other things that are also simultaneously happening at the same time, which means we're moving into a very turbulent phase shift window where one or the other will prevail, and that's break down or break through. So what do I feel intuitively? I don't want to scare the audience. I think...
Yeah, this is a mature audience. My podcast is commonly called the deepest podcast in the world, and there's over 63,000 Chek professionals, many of which listen to this, and they're all highly intelligent, wise people that are already hip to all this. So you don't have to pull any punches here.
Yeah, and if you listen to some of the experts, and I'm not an expert in that field, climate scientists, and we've got Mo Gaudat from Google, ex-engineer there, and other incredible people, even David Attenborough saying, we're moving closer and closer towards that cliff, and we're not far off walking off it. And I think the way I see it is it's kind of like it's 22 all with 3 minutes to go in the game, and no one's leaving the bleachers because we don't know who's going to win. We don't know which is going to be the outcome. And that's the sort of the way I like to inspire my clients that I coach, the conscious leaders. I say to them, if it's 22 all and there's 3 minutes to go, it's the time for the best players to play their best game.
Yeah.
It's not the time to sit back and go, oh my God, I don't think we're going to win. This is no good. This is hopeless. It's actually the time to really lean in and go, okay, what can I do to make a difference, to shift things? And I'm friends with a guy who has a large venture capital fund called Lionheart. And I don't know if you've heard of them. They're based in San Francisco. And David Langer, the Lionheart Venture Capital Fund, invests in existential risk to humanity. And they're investing in 4 main pillars that they see as the main risks to humanity. And this is a big, very large fund that is putting their money where their mouth is, where they actually want to, and they see a major risk to humanity's existence. And they're investing in ways to prevent that. But one of the biggest ones that they're investing in is plant medicine and things like meditation and mindfulness, because they see that the state of consciousness is the greatest issue with humanity right now. And I feel that as well. And if we can shift people's minds and open people's hearts, then I think we're going to have a great capacity to change the planet in a big way going forward. And I think that's already happening right now.
Yeah, well, we're, many experts now say we're in the 3rd psychedelic revival. And the last 2 waves came when there was a lot of stress in the world, like Vietnam, for example, and people felt that the government was not representing them and was being abusive. And we had human rights crisis. And it seems that, I'm a very experienced, shall we say, I've done over 1,000 plant medicine ceremonies to help people heal and for my own personal growth and research. So I have a lot of experience in that space as well as all things related to it. So I know the power of plant medicines. And I think that there is a quickening of consciousness. Of course, with anything, it can be abused. And even meditation, people can meditate for 20 years and not grow at all. I've watched that happen plenty too. But I do definitely feel that there is quite a upshift in consciousness. I mean, the number of podcasts out on these topics now is, I couldn't even count them all. And I think everything that happened over the last, 4.5 years or however long it's been now was a great opportunity for people to realize that we can no longer trust father figures or big daddy figures or government figures to guide our lives, and that we've got to start doing our own research and be more adult about managing ourselves and not just eating whatever is in front of us and paying attention to what's being put in the skies and the water, on the soil, paying attention to the fact that a lot of medical doctors are not really abiding by the Hippocratic Oath, and they are happy to vaccinate people with things that don't even have any risks or ingredients on the label, which, if you think about that, that's just absolutely crazy. So I think what's happened is COVID really was like a great revealer of the collective shadow worldwide, and where we've got to step into our adult responsibilities and start getting involved in everything from the way we feed and raise and educate our children to what we allow into libraries, to what we do for medical procedures and who we trust and who we don't trust and who we vote for or don't vote for. And thank God, I really hoped RFK would have become president here, but for his own reasons and strategic planning, as you know, he went with Trump. And just knowing that he's in the government now with Donald Trump, and I recently heard that Donald Trump elected assigned Joel Salatin a position to oversee the farming aspects of the United States. Do you know who Joel Salatin is?
I've heard his name, but I wasn't sure what area he had sort of jurisdiction over.
He's one of the most tapped in farmers on the planet. I mean, when I heard that, I about jumped for joy, because Joel Salatin is the premier organic free range, farming expert. And to put someone like that in is like, now we got RFK in charge of health. We got Joel Salatin. So he's bringing in some heavy hitters, and it's almost like Donald Trump is going through his own conscious revival, because looking at some of the people he's bringing in, it's very different than the first President Trump. As much as I don't really like Donald Trump for many reasons, you always have to keep your heart open for revolution and evolution. And I think the last 5 years or so has like been a rototiller.
Yeah, I think the last few years really sort of shone the light on some areas of our society that maybe needed to be sort of being brought to the surface and revealed. And I liken it to, if we want to delete a file on our computer, it's quite interesting that the thing we actually want to remove or maybe becomes irrelevant in our computer, we actually have to click on it and highlight it. It's like you're putting all your attention on the thing that you actually don't want. And I thought that's a really interesting process, because you have to click on it and then you hit the delete, but you can't hit delete until you actually put the attention on it, highlights. And I think that's something that the last few years have done, is has shown us parts of our world that maybe they have been not relevant for us as a species, or maybe there's parts of society that have been going on that people weren't quite aware of, and now all of a sudden it's come to the surface. And it's sometimes a little bit unpleasant and a little bit icky when you hear or see these things, but it's, as you said, it's a part of the process, and it's one of the sequential steps that need to happen in that evolution of the process. So it's a big transition time that we're going in collectively, and we're moving from a me to a we phase. And for everyone listening, it's you can actually start to see this me to we paradigm shift happening, where people are starting to think a lot more about the collective. People that are getting put into positions of power, interestingly, are people that consider more about the collective. And so I think that we can start seeing this unfolding more and more as we start becoming more integrated and more unified as a species, not just with each other, but with the planet as well.
Yeah. And, as a therapist, having conducted thousands of detox protocols with people and done plenty of my own, whenever you're in a detox protocol, the reality of it is that the toxins like mercury and things that are trapped in the tissues come out. They get in the blood. You can feel very terrible. You can get what's called a Hexheimer response, which is the illness of healing. And I think we're going through that. We have to experience what it is that we're clearing out, just like you got to put your awareness on the file that you want to delete so you don't delete something you want. And so, yeah, it has been messy. It could be more messy. Maybe now that we're a little more adult collectively, we can manage the mess a little better so it's not so messy. But that brings me to my next point of dialogue with you. I noticed you put a lot of importance on finding our purpose and passion in life. In my education system, I teach a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach to all Chek professionals in training for their own life and for guiding patients and clients. Without a long expose, because most people listening know what it is, but the one is the one love. I say, look, before you can have an effective therapy plan with anyone, you got to find out what they love enough to heal and grow for. If you just throw the best program at them, even if it's the most scientifically designed program, but you don't identify something that gives them enough levity to overcome the gravity of their life and the circumstances that brought them into the situation that led them to you in the first place, they're probably not going to follow the program. And I've seen that countless times. I'd love to know from your perspective, I mean, obviously that's important to you. How do you define purpose and passion, and what distinguishes one from the other? I mean, passion can be passion for anything, but if there's a way that you would, like I say, what is your one love? I call that your dream, goal, or objective. So I need something that you're willing to focus on. And I say you have to qualify that. You can't just throw anything out there. I say to my patients and to my students, you have to have at least a 7 out of 10 buy-in, 10 being kamikaze pilot committed, 0 being non-committed, or your heart won't get involved. And if your heart's not in it, you're never going to be able to stick at it. I've watched this happen a million times. So maybe you can share how you feel purpose and passion fit into that, and what your sense of context for those two are.
Yeah, it's a really important discussion, particularly when people start diving deeper into spirituality, because there's that potential and possibility we move into what's called nihilism. And this is something I see often in spiritual communities, is a sense of nihilism being that, what's the point? We're kind of like, it's just, let's just sit around playing guitar and singing Kumbaya, my Lord. But it's we want to find something deeper as far as what is our relevance, what is our purpose, and finding passion in that. I see there's a 3-step process that people generally go through, because this purpose and passion will be variable based upon where someone's at in their sequence of life. And I see that where we go through these 3 phases. The first phase is that we're a seeker. And even from a very young child, in the early stages of childhood, they're still seeking, where's the dummy, where's the toy, where's the boob, where's the TV screen. And so we're constantly, all through childhood, teenage years, adulthood, we're seeking pleasure outside of us.
Yeah.
And in the seeking, that normally leads to usually some degree of disappointment or dissatisfaction, because we can never actually find what we're looking for. And that's when we go through usually a bit of a dark night. And that's when we sort of like, I'm lost, I feel hopeless, I can't find what I'm looking for. I got the plasma TV screen, I had the holiday to Tulum, I've got the kids and the wife and the mortgage.
Tulum, you got that one.
I still can't seem to find what I'm looking for. And that's when we go through that dark night. And then we go into a deeper sort of exploration. Maybe it's not outside of me, maybe it's inside of me. Now we go into the finding, and that is through whatever tools we use, whether it's breath work, plant medicine, meditation, yoga, qigong. We use methodologies to start discovering where the actual source of true fulfillment actually lies, which is deep within us in the source of spirit. And then from finder, what naturally happens next, which is why you've got 60,000, trainers under you in the Chek program, is we go into sharer. And that is where I've discovered something that was profoundly impacting for me. And I can't but help want to share this with the world. Yes. I need to find some way that whatever I've found, whether it's how to flip houses or how to trade crypto or how to, do breath work or how to heal from trauma, I need to somehow bring this knowledge to other people. And I think it's in our natural design. And I think of it, like you said earlier on in the beginning of this conversation, that we're kind of like little cells in a large cell, or little cells in a large system. And if you think of what a cell does, a cell only has a certain lifespan, but it has an intelligence within it, whether it's a nail cell or a stomach lining cell or an eyebrow cell. And what happens is, as that cell bifurcates and starts to fade away, it actually passes on the information to the new cell, from what I believe. I might be wrong. There might be someone with more intelligence than me around this, but the cells pass on the information to the new cell that replaces the old cell. And so this natural tendency, as us being millions and billions and trillions of cells, have built within us this tendency to want to share the information. And that's why we feel purpose and passion around the process of sharing. Adults love to share information. Teachers love to share information. Trainers love to share information. And so I think what we want to get to at some point is being relevant and significant and purposeful in our ability to make a difference in the world. And I think when we see people going through their stages of life, that stage of having meaning and purpose is the process of contributing in a way that adds value in some way, shape, or form. And just to finish on that, the passion comes from, in the Vedic tradition, we recognize there is a substance called Ojas. Ojas is this blissful elixir. And a number of things will activate Ojas. Meditation, breath work, all sorts of things will activate this blissful elixir that's in our body. But one of the things that activates Ojas more than anything is, interestingly, when we're teaching.
Oh, I didn't know that. I've known of other things such as breath work and various other, even stress can do it. And isn't the Ojas DMT from the pineal gland?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And so when we're teaching, we get this sort of sense of elevation. Particularly, I get it when I'm running retreats, when I'm teaching meditation, when I'm coaching clients. And the student also receives that Ojas as well. So there's a beautiful exchange happening, which is, I think it's a beautiful design of the universe to create that substance that comes when we start teaching, because that's actually the mechanism for evolution. I think it's almost like, okay, how are we going to design this so that humans will be inspired to teach? We'll make them feel good when they're teaching.
Yeah.
That'll be a good idea. Let's put Ojas in their system when they're teaching. So that is how we get motivated and inspired and passionful when we're passing on knowledge.
Did you hear that, Penny? Now you know why I have a hard time stopping when I start teaching. I'm high off the experience. Too funny.
It's funny, just on that, it's people always think they're going to get to a point when they run these very successful businesses and they can just sit on a deck chair and, and have a holiday drinking virgin pina coladas in the sun. But funnily enough, we actually feel higher and more fulfilled when we're doing our work and when we're teaching. So people might seem like we never stop and we just keep, doing our work, but it's actually because we actually feel best when we're doing it.
Yeah. Were there pivotal moments or experiences? I mean, you talked about being a stockbroker and kind of a crisis there. Was there something that ultimately brought you into the awareness of what it was that was your passion or your calling that maybe, like I'll give you an example. There was a point in my life as a therapist. I had done a lot of things. I became a father when I just turned 18. I had no parents, had no money. Her parents had no money. I had to go for it, so I had to do whatever job I could get. And I was involved in a lot of different trades and, as the years went by. But then when I got to the point where I was probably in my 30s, people used to say to me quite commonly, you're the only one that can explain things to me in a way that I understand them. How is it that you do that so well? And it was like all of a sudden I had this realization that all these different trades I'd been in, from electronics to automotive and industrial repair to logging to exploration and water well drilling, farming, a lot of different things, working on fishing boats, being a paratrooper, ... All of a sudden, I realized that my soul had led me to gaining enough life experience in enough different ways that I could actually relate to almost anybody and use so if I was working with an electrician that had, say, a disc bulge, I could explain things to him the way I would explain a wiring diagram or a circuit. I could explain to a mechanic using hydraulics or internal combustion or electronics or mechanical systems and electrical systems. I could explain things to a hairdresser. And it was like all of a sudden I realized that there was this golden thread running through the course of my life that even when I was younger, I didn't see it. But now that I look back on my life, I went, wow, the reason I can be such a successful therapist is because of all these other things that I did, often which I hated while I was doing. But I gained the ability to look through the eyes of different people and have that sense of what it's like to really have to work on a fishing boat in high seas and all the challenges with it. What is it like to be a logger? What is it like to be a mechanic and be underneath cars and hot this and stinky that? And so there I felt this magical golden thread that pulled us all together. So I'm curious, was there a certain point in your life where all of a sudden you had that experience and went, wow, it was all to get me here? And what was it, the experience that you had?
Certainly there's been some experiences that were major catalysts for where I am today, but I think this is an ongoing process of becoming. We're always in the process of becoming, we're always in the process of acquiring knowledge, and we're always, more often than not, in the process of sharing that knowledge. So I think for me, the biggest shift was certainly when I found, for me, meditation was an absolute game-changing experience for me. And I was so passionate about how powerful it was for changing my life that I really felt compelled to bring that to other people's lives. I thought, if this was such a simple technique that's been around for 5,000 years and it could reduce my anxiety, my panic attacks, my insomnia, my depression, my flus, my colds, simply by putting my body out of the sympathetic into the parasympathetic nervous system, then I've got to get this to the world. Like, this is, going to wreak havoc on the pharmaceutical industry because they're dependent on people staying in the stress response state. And I was blown away at the idiocy of the idea that we have a whole bunch of stressed people and then we medicate them without addressing the underlying stress that's actually causing most of the sickness in the first place. And I always love that quote from Bruce Lipton from Stanford University Medical School that says 95% of all sickness is a result of stress. So for me, discovering meditation was the biggest shift that shifted the direction of my life, where I wanted to bring this to the world in a big way. So that's how we started the Stillness Project and the vision and mission to inspire 1 billion people to meditate daily. But I think, along the way, we learn from our experiences. And I thought that I wanted to write books. I thought I wanted to make a film as part of the methodology for bringing that knowledge to the world. But I learned, in having written 6 books and made and produced a film, that that's actually not the best use of my time and not something that I want to do. Again, I might write maybe one more book if I'm retired and I've got nothing else to do in my time. But what I find and what I'm getting clear about is, for each and every person, what's their sweet spot of how they love spending their time and what they're qualified in and what they're skilled in and what their skill sets are, then that's where you want to thrive and really grow. And so for me, running retreats, coaching, teaching, speaking are the areas that I feel best suited for. Spending 3, 4, 5 years trying to produce a film was really taking me away from my sweet spot. So a big thing that I help people understand is knowing what your sweet spot is, what your dharma is, what you feel the most that you can bring to the world, and the space you want to do that in, is going to be really important, because we might have lots of glamorous and interesting things pulling our attention, come this way and come that way. Like you said, you get those emails every day if someone got a new funnel idea or some new ad campaign you should do for your business. And it's very easy to get swept along by a lot of different options that you can be doing in life. But I think we've got to really listen to our hearts, and I'm getting better at doing that and knowing what is the space that I like to be in and where do I have the best and greatest impact on people. And it's going to be different for everyone. Like Deepak's a classic, brilliant writer. He can just write, and you've written lots of books as well. So some people are really gifted with that ability to just write and write and write, and other people have the gift to actually be an orator and speak, or it might be that their gift is to be a mechanic and fix cars. So whatever your sweet spot is, I think is really important.
Well, that leads right into my next topic of discussion. I personally feel that each soul carries its own unique inherent genius, and that we are most capable of being resilient in the life process when we find ways to express our genius. Tom, do you believe that everyone has a singular purpose, or can it evolve over time? Do you feel that, like I do, that each soul has a genius that is, if we engage that, is a unique contribution to the whole? Love to hear your thoughts in that regard.
I'm becoming more and more aware every day of the insanely magnificent capabilities and qualities that each person has been gifted with, and they're all unique and they're all different. I'm just not a great artist. I don't know how to paint, I don't know how to draw, but I've got people and friends in my life that it's just so natural and so easy for them to be incredible artists. And so we all have, and I believe not just one, but multiple gifts and talents. And some people I know, sports people, that have got, ones that can be brilliant cricketer, baseballer, and basketballer all in one. Some people are a classic, multiple talents in multiple areas. And I think we all have incredible magnificence, incredible gifts, incredible talents, but our society doesn't support the growth of those. It really is designed in some way, whether it's purposely designed or accidentally designed, to really dumb us down, to play small, to be mediocre. And particularly in Australia, we have a thing called tall poppy syndrome, where anyone that thrives and succeeds, they kind of tend to shut them down quite quickly. But I think we're starting to realize that it's really healthy, and it's really important that we start to unlock these incredible gifts and really embrace them, and to remove any barriers of limiting beliefs, unworthiness, and self-doubt and imposter syndrome that really hold us back from just stepping into that greatness and really expressing that with reckless abandon, with fearlessness.
Yeah, I recently aired a podcast with Edmund Knighton, who's got a long history of being a Steiner teacher and director of the various Waldorf school programs, and has a PhD in psychology, a very deep, interesting, amazing guy. And we got into that quite a lot. My kids are in a Waldorf school because I really feel Steiner had deep wisdom and the effective way to educate children so that they don't get dumbed down, so that their left brain isn't turned on before their right brain has a chance to grow and then reach out naturally to connect with the left brain. And the Steiner schools are very, very oriented towards creating a playful environment with a lot of art, movement, dance, before they get them into a lot of the heavier mathematics, reading, and left brain teaching. And I've had the joy of meeting high school students and graduates from the Waldorf system, and they're just so much more grounded, whole, and capable thinkers. And it was interesting too, once I came across a study where they were looking at problem solving, and they studied children from different school systems, and one of the groups was from a Waldorf school. And what they did was they put these kids with groups of people, and one of them was a plant, and the plant was specifically there to be hard to get along with, and they were given a problem to solve, and the plant would purposely kind of sabotage everything. And what they found is that the kids in other school systems would get very irritated and upset, and the ability to move forward would just be disabled. But they found with the kids raised in the Waldorf system that you couldn't piss them off, that they just kept trying new ways to reach this person. And so it showed very clearly that the Waldorf educated children had a much more holistic, circular approach, where the kids raised in traditional public type school systems were very linear, and if they couldn't get the response that they were trying to get, that they would just give up, and the whole thing would just go to loggerheads. So I think it's really important that we recognize each child's genius, and instead of parents forcing the kid into what they want it to become, that they create an environment where the child can find its own soul path and where its heart takes it, and nurture it in that direction. Tom, many people are confused about what spirit and soul actually are. I have empathy for them because, having explored these concepts within the concepts of each of the world's great religions, there's a vast difference regarding how spirit and soul are described. And among atheists, there's no belief in spirit or soul as even real. Therefore, one's beliefs regarding the reality and nature of spirit and soul must always reflect their beliefs or non-beliefs about God. Tom, to begin with, can you share your thoughts on what God is, and from that basis define what spirit and soul are and why these concepts are so important to have clarity on?
Wow, we're diving deep now. I like that.
Let's get on it, baby.
God. So we have a very, I guess, constructed idea of what God is based upon many, millenniums of religious indoctrination. And if you think of all religions are constructed by humans in a particular state of consciousness or state of mind, and then that ideology then gets passed on from parent to child, as we said, in that indoctrination that happens. And I grew up in a very Catholic sort of family, and I had a strong sense of God. But now I see that as an evolution into my spiritual understanding of life. So I see God as a divine intelligence that permeates the entire cosmos. And when I say cosmos, we're talking about not just our universe, but possibly what we're starting to discover, maybe there's multiple universes. So God, I would basically use different words for it. It could be the divine, it could be the higher self, it could be source with a capital S. But I had a strong sense in my childhood, and I have an even stronger sense now, that there is this unified field of intelligence. And we're starting to discover, even Einstein and string theory and all sorts of things are starting to validate that there's this permeating energy and force field. And if anyone's an atheist, they obviously most likely don't understand quantum physics, I feel, because that we're starting to discover that there is a unified field and that there is a pervading essence that is beyond the physicality of form. And to think humans are very narcissistic and egocentric, to think that we're the center of the universe. We have this tiny little dust ball of a planet revolving around a tiny little spark that will burn out at some point, creating a black hole, and we'll all get sucked into that and be the end of the journey for this tiny little microcosm of a tiny little corner of the universe. And to think that we know it all is kind of quite crazy and quite comical.
It's called anthropocentric thinking is the technical name of that.
It's good that there's a word for it. I'll have to remember that. For me, God is an omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient essence. And if it's omnipotent, it's all powerful. If it's omniscient, it's all knowing. And if it's omnipresent, it's all things, which means that everything is it, which means that we are it. And I had this discussion with someone who was quite religious. And I said, do you believe in an omnipresent God? And I said, oh, absolutely. I said, then that would imply that you're it. And they said, oh, no.
I know this problem very well.
And I said, but if you agree that there's an omnipresent God, yes, then omnipresent can't exclude you. And so it's just that we're in degrees of realization of that. And from the amoeba to the plant, to the animal, to the human, to the avatar human or enlightened human, to then the ethereal soul existence within the cosmos, and then obviously continuing on through an evolutionary sequence to eventually the full realization, the unencumbered integration and realization of the God source being you, which is actually not really you, but it. There's only it. And we seem to be the you or the I, which is just a temporary, ignorant understanding about where we're at in the evolutionary sequence.
I think as people evolve and have their own spiritual experiences, whether they come by way of a crisis or a properly run plant medicine ceremony or spontaneous mystical experiences. My first Samadhi happened, interestingly, at the age of 18, which I don't know what brought it on, but at the time, my first wife was giving birth to my son. So here I was, an 18-year-old young man. I was in the delivery room with her for the whole 72 hours of very intense labor. And as his head came out of the birth canal, suddenly I was one with everything in the universe. And it was such a shock. And I was actually simultaneously in every star and in every place looking into the theater of the operating room or the delivery center in the hospital. At that moment when all of a sudden my consciousness turned back, where I was looking at myself, watching my son come out of the birth canal, I realized that I wasn't in my body. And all of a sudden I had the awareness of myself as oneness, as unity, but I was also aware that I was alive in this body as this person at this time. And, my point being is that there was no drugs involved. There was no specific spiritual practice at that moment. I was simply watching my son be born, and it blew me right into the cosmos, and I had a total samadhi. Fortunately, I've had, a countless number of them since then in all sorts of different ways. And so they're not so shocking. And when I do have them, I love to just be with it and relax into it, where in the initial several of them, there would be a moment of shock where I thought maybe I was dying or something, but now I'm able to breathe through them. My point is I think that life, particularly if we have a sense of openness to it, I think if we're too rigid, we can block even God. Hi, everybody. I know that you're all aware of the importance of vitamin C. There is a mountain of research on it, but not all C is created equally. I love Paleo Valley's Essential C complex because it is the real deal, bioavailable. And I wanted you to hear right from Autumn Smith, founder of Paleo Valley, why their Essential C complex is so unique and something you definitely want for your family and your children. Autumn, tell us about your Essential C complex.
Well, I was shocked to learn as a holistic nutritionist that 90%, over 90% of the vitamin C on the market is derived from genetically modified corn, and then it's processed with highly volatile acids. And so I knew I had to find a better way to get all of the powerful benefits of vitamin C. So what I did was I dove into the research and I found the 3 most vitamin C rich superfoods on the planet. That's unripe acerola cherry and camu camu and amla berry. And then I just packed them into capsules. And the benefits are amazing because you're not only getting vitamin C, but all of the other wonderful benefits that come from these amazing superfoods. So to get access to this complex, all you have to do is go to paleovalley.com and you can use the code CHEK15 at checkout. That's lowercase CHEK 15, and you can save 15% off.
If we have an inherent openness within our soul nature to receive higher truth, that it permeates us. It's kind of like I'm trying to find a right word for it, but just like we grow from being a child to an adult, to an elderly person, to death, and that process carries us along. Nobody can stop the aging process, no matter how much plastic surgery they do or what pills they take. It's inherent that we go through this process. I think that within us, the soul is ultimately working through the circumstances and the temporality and the duality of life to bring us glimpses of and experiences of the oneness, the higher truth that ultimately points to God as an experience, not as an idea. Just like we were talking about the evolution that we're going through in society. And I asked you, what do you think is going to be the potential crisis? And you shared your thoughts. It's just like every parent knows that when a child becomes a teenager, there's a period of chaos and rejection of mom and dad, and they have to go off and find themselves and bang into things and find out what drugs and sex are all about and responsibility. And I think the flower opens to these higher truths at its own pace. But I think the more people there are sharing things like we're sharing, and like we talked about plant medicine ceremonies, and just as the world gets more stressful and people realize they can't find security outside themselves until they have it within themselves, that I think the collective consciousness is going to start, bringing the flowers up faster. I think the more of us that are awake and share, the more we make it comfortable for people to be safe to have these experiences. And I think that alone could accelerate our evolution.
Yeah, you mentioned such a beautiful word and an important word that I think is really missing on the planet right now, and that's Samadhi. And to break Samadhi down, just so those that don't know the origins of that word, or I guess Sama, S-A-M-A, is where we get the word same. And then DHI means intellect. And so Buddha, who was Siddhartha, had a name given to him, Buddha, because he had a Buddhic intellect, that is an intellect of an enlightened one. And so Samadhi means that our intellect is not changing. We're in a state beyond the realm of thought. We're not in the thinking mind, which is the egoic mind. The egoic mind is the thinking mind because the thoughts all pretty much generally revolve around our own identity and personality. So when we transcend the thinking mind, and now we're in the field of pure consciousness, this is something that we can get as an epiphany, like Eckhart Tolle had. It could be something that happens in a deep transcending meditation. It can happen in certain plant-based ceremonies and experiences. Some people might have them through extreme sports or something, but there's an experience that we can have as a human. In Sanskrit, it's called turiya, the fourth state, beyond the thoughts, beyond the feelings, beyond the physicality, beyond dream state, beyond deep sleep. And turiya is where we're now in an unbounded realm, beyond form and beyond time, beyond manifestation. And the beautiful thing is we're getting to this point where people have been using these practices and modalities to get us into turiya or samadhi for thousands of years. But the exciting thing in the last 20 years, maybe 50 years, but predominantly mainly in the last 20 and 10 years, is this extreme proliferation of these modalities and techniques and practices that are giving humans now the access point to samadhi or turiya. And the thing that happens when we get into turiya or samadhi is we start to experientially have that sense of not the I, but the unbounded. And we can only experience the unbounded when we're not in the I. And that letting go you talked about before, that really complete, almost like sense of loss and surrender, because that's actually what's happening. And Adyashanti has a great book called The End of Your World, which is all about the end of the thing that's stopping you from having the unbounded experience, the whole oneness experience. And there's a great book by Richard Sylvester called I Hope You Die Soon.
I like that.
It's such a good title. And he's talking about the death of the thing that's holding you back from the experience of that unbounded, that oneness field. And that's why we called the film and book The Portal, because it is about, for us, meditation was my portal into that realm. But the realm exists. It's just what's your portal through to it? And we can't think our way to it. We can't shop our way to it. We can't scroll our way to it. We can't vaccine our way to it. But we can transcend into it using different modalities. And just going back on this dumbing down of our society, it's really interesting that something like psilocybin, which is considered in Australia as a Class A drug, so it's up there with heroin, and you can get extreme prison sentences for having this. And yet alcohol, which is a dumbing down tool.
Alcohol also strengthens the ego.
That's right.
This is
exactly
why they let soldiers drink all the alcohol they want, but they don't want them smoking any pot, because pot's actually a psychedelic, which brings you into a greater sense of connection and makes you not want to fight. I don't know, just as a side note, do you know what happened when Albert Hoffman thought that LSD might be useful as a truth serum, and he gave it to the Pentagon to test?
That was in the Monasteric Goats, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know. I couldn't stay with that whole movie. It bored me too much, so I had to stop watching it. But they gave it to a team of Green Berets, and they said, well, if we're going to test this, let's test this on elite soldiers. So they gave them one, I don't know how many micrograms, but I think it was 250 micrograms, which is a pretty good dose. But after the drug wore off, they all wanted out of the army. They didn't want to fight and kill people anymore. And so that's when the United States government realized we got to get this shit off the streets, because it will destroy our capacity to condition soldiers to fight for whatever we want them to. Point being is that psychedelics have an ego dissolving effect, but alcohol concentrates the ego, which is why they call it courage juice. So my point is the legality of certain drugs is planned.
Yeah, I can see that.
Tom, one's beliefs about God, spirit, and soul are generally the lens through which their conscious or unconscious cosmology is created. In your opinion, what do you feel the importance of being conscious of your own personal cosmology is?
It's absolutely critical. What we have in the world is a lot of enquiry, not inquiry. Enquiry, external, is out there somewhere is my identity and source of fulfillment. So in the shopping mall, in my phone, in my social media, in my work, in my relationships. So we're always looking externally, but we have a very small portion of the people on the planet doing what we call enquiry, which is looking deeper within to the nature of self, the nature of reality. And that inquiry is something that is just something that's going to come with time as we exhaust our research in the external world. And we tend to find people at the age of 30, 40, 50 start going, look, I did everything I thought I should do. I got everything I thought I should do, and I didn't quite find the fulfillment I was looking for. They start doing the inquiry, and that's the inner looking. And I find that that deep inquiry and deep exploration into the nature of reality, the nature of truth, the nature of your own, as you say, cosmology, I think to understand the nature of the self should be the foundation of our reality and the foundation of our existence. Because otherwise we're operating in a world of confusion, of loss, of trauma, of chaos. And that then manifests into our lives, into our working life, into the businesses we create. And we can see that in the world right now, that there's just a lack of connection and awareness about the cosmology of self and nature of God and the pervasiveness of that. So yeah, it's absolutely critical and essential, I think, as a human being.
Tom, our beliefs about God, spirit, soul, and our personal cosmology are essentially our personal myth. What is your conception of myth in general, our personal mythology, and how our personal mythology impacts a culture for better or worse?
You know, the Vedic tradition that I studied under for 30 years is riddled and filled with mythology, storytelling, and the beautiful, I guess, Indigenous people of Australia have a lot of mythology in that. And I think this is such an important part of the conveyance of knowledge, and storytelling is always such an important component in the fabric of our society. And you see that societies that have had longevity have great mythology in them. There's so much value and potency in mythology, in its ability to convey and translate messages, something that's probably not much in our society anymore.
Well, I was just going to bring that up because, in the last probably 20 to 50 years, but particularly the last 20, as we've become more and more oriented towards scientific materialism, the word myth has been used to equate to a lie. And what's happened is so many of the left brain rationalists in universities around the world and even in theology departments have done scientific investigations into things like Noah's Ark and the stories in the Bible and said this is all bullshit because there's no way this could happen, and here's the scientific evidence. And I could go on a long list of these things, but I think what the problem there is that completely shows that the person and people making these statements don't know what a myth is. And so they don't realize that a myth is an analogy, it's an allegory, it's a metaphor, it's something that's pointing beyond itself, like poetry. So, and by the way, speaking of poetry, when we were talking about God, you were talking about a unified field. I don't know if you've ever heard this quote by Rumi, but Rumi says, beyond judgment, there's a field. I'll meet you there. And really, that's God, right? Judgment means duality. And then beyond duality is the field. I'll meet you there. In other words, I'll meet you in this truth of yourself, of God. But I think my point is that because we've got so many scientific materialists now influencing the education of young people and organizing research projects, that they have lost the creative capacity to understand myth like we would read poetry, and so they're reading it literally. And this actually plays out. Huston Smith, he recently died a couple of years ago, but he was considered the world's most highly regarded expert in world religion. He's the only person in the world to devote 5 years of his life to living with the people and practicing each of the world's major religions for 5 years. So he traveled to each of the different regions of the world, lived with them, and fully immersed himself in that religion for 5 years. And he was a professor of world religion. He wrote many excellent books. It'd be worth your time to look up Huston Smith. But Huston Smith shows there's 4 levels of interpreting scripture, from the lowest to the highest. The lowest level of scriptural interpretation is literal interpretation. Joseph Campbell alludes to the danger of literal interpretation of scripture. He says, when you read your Bible as a dictation instead of a connotation, you are in trouble, So Houston Smith said that literal interpretation is I-centric. It's whatever you think based on your interpretation. The next level is ethnocentric, which literally means my group against your group. And the number one cause of war, as Ken Wilber even reiterated 3 times in his recent new book, Radical Wholeness, religion is the number one cause of war. Then we have metaphorical or a allegorical, which is the third level. So when you read scripture as an allegory, that's the third level. So that's going from the bottom. And then finally, the fourth and the highest level is inspirational. So whenever you read scripture, if it is used and translated and understood as a means of inspiring you, whether it's inspiring you not to make that mistake or not to live in this way, then you don't take it literally like a lawyer takes a law. You see into it in ways that inspire people. And I think part of the problem is that people that are looking at myths are at the lowest level. Their lens of perception is their own scientific materialistic perception. And then their ethnocentric orientation is scientific materialism, which is full of atheists. So we've destroyed myth. But one of my favorite definitions of myth, which is very profound, I learned this from a professor of theology and philosophy, James Carse, who wrote some of the most amazing books. If you haven't ever looked at James Carse's book, Finite and Infinite Games, it's a mind-bendingly good book. And it's not a long book either. It's very powerful. But James Carse said, a myth is a story that tells itself. And so if you think of life as a story, and we ask the question, who is telling the story? Then that brings you into a very deep contemplative meditation that I think can ultimately lead you to your own experience of what God is. So when we look at myth as a story that tells itself, and we say, what are the stories that have lasted a long time? Well, we have the Hindu myths, we have the Greek myths, we have myths in all cultures, we have native tribal myths, Aboriginal myths. You know, an example of an Aboriginal statement of myth is the stars are the campfires of our ancestors. Well, that's classically Aboriginal. A left-brain scientist would say, well, that's just a bunch of silliness. But if you have had deep spiritual experiences, you could sit with that statement, the stars are the campfires of our ancestors, and that could mean many things. Like if that was a line of poetry, if you took that literally from a spiritual perspective, then it could actually open you up to some very profound insights. For example, it could be a statement that God is infinite and that what's happening here may seem new to you, but this is a recapitulation of an evolutionary process that goes on infinitely. And then you look at, for example, in the Upanishads and in Hindu scripture, you've got the yugas, the Kali Yuga and the various Iron Age, Gold Age, Dwapara Yuga, etc. So it shows that in cyclical time that we're actually going through this process of repeating these various types of experience, but they spiral. So each time we go around one of the cycles of these yugas, we become more evolved and we kind of go back to school at each level, but at a higher level. Point being, I think that if people understood the real nature of myth, then they would realize that the most powerful thing we have is our story, which is our personal myth. Jung says, he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakes. And so there's a very profound thing. If you look outside your dream, but if you look inside, you awaken. And ultimately what you're awakening to is your own mythology, your own story. So anyhow, I just was curious about how your personal sense of orientation towards myth was. And because our personal cosmology, if you were to go interview 1,000 people and say, what's your personal cosmology, among those that actually understood it, what you would really get if you studied the hallmarks of myth is you'd get all these people's myth.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about science, because I get that the world needs science in some ways. Obviously, it plays an integral role in certainly validating, but also creating wonderful things that like certain medicines that have made a huge difference in the world. The thing I've found with science and science research is that a lot of science is validating what already is. It's like, okay, now we can say that this is true.
Yes.
Before, we didn't have the science to say that the Earth isn't the center of our solar system. And then eventually science says, actually, the sun is the center of the solar system. So science actually only got to validate something that was actually always and always will be true. And this is the problem with science, is that it's kind of like it's in retrospect, because it's only validating what already exists to be apparently true, or always was true, I should say.
Yes.
And science's ability to validate that. And so what we don't know scientifically yet, we may know sometime in the future. It's just that we haven't got science to catch up with that yet. And that might be that, let's just say that there is cosmos of unified. Now that we've got unified field theory, we can sort of say science is saying that there is some sort of subtle field of intelligence that's pervading all reality. And mythology would have been saying that that's the case for thousands of years through some sort of mythological storytelling. But then thousands of years later, science finally says, oh, one man like Einstein says, oh, actually, there's this unified field now. And everyone goes, wow, that's science. Science is saying there's it's only telling us what was already there, but now we can understand it on a scientific level.
Yes. And, mystics have been saying the very things that quantum physicists are now saying for thousands of years. In fact, Plotinus, who I've studied very deeply, is probably the most quoted mystic philosopher by quantum physicists the world over. I've studied all these things a lot, and Plotinus comes up over and over and over again. But Giordano Bruno, he did come from somewhat of a Christian background, but he was also a soldier, if I remember right, at one point. But he was quite an evolved man I think he's 15th century. I think he was an alchemist as well. But he had many profound mystical experiences, and he was teaching people that the earth is not the center of the universe. The sun is the center of the universe, and that there's not one sun, there's an infinite number of them, and that the thing that we experience here is happening all over the universe. And the Christian church arrested him for that. They put him in prison for 7 years and tortured him regularly and said, you must never say these things to people, and we will let you go if you become a Christian and promise to never talk like this again. And he refused, and finally they burned him at the cross because he would not recant his statements. But there's a classic example of a guy, 500 plus years ago, and he was saying things that were so far ahead of his time. Yet now, if you study cosmology, the very things that he was saying, and you get into theories like many worlds theory or the omniverse theory or infinite spiral staircase theory by Chris Hardy and a number of them, that's exactly what they're telling us. So the point I'm making is science is actually usually 2,000 or more years behind the mystics, and the mythologies of the world were telling us, for example, most mythologies of the world of origin myths talk about the whole of creation coming out of water or the divine ocean. And lo and behold, if you look at the science of the ether that's currently available, they describe it like a divine ocean. It's like, okay, it took you a while, you guys. I think one of the reasons this is important is because I've studied about 37 theories of everything in the development of my Spirit Gym book series, many of which I've studied over the years, but not one of them actually can objectively state where all this is coming from. Wherever, no one can state for sure what makes the strings in string theory. Electric universe theory talks about the electric universe, but I asked on 2 different occasions, I had their chief scientist on my podcast, Walt Thornhill, who is from Australia. He died recently, but I said, okay, you're talking about an electric universe. In order to have a circuit, you have to have a power source. In a car, it's a battery. In a house, it's a power generator. I said, what's the power source for the energy that's creating the circuits that are making the galaxies and the stars? And he said, I don't know. Nobody knows. Point I'm making is every single theory of origins in science does not know what's causing it to happen. None of them can validate that. If you go to religion cannot give an objective definition of God either. They can only create their dogma and try to convince you that that's it. But if you take all 12 of the world's great religions and put all their beliefs about God on and all their origin stories, none of them match. So the point I'm making is science and religion are not on any better of an objective footing, which means they're both mythologies. Yes, we have classical science that can tell you physics and what happens when you use a certain amount of pressure with an object a certain weight, like a bullet, what its trajectory will be. But that's mechanical physics. That's not a physics of origins like quantum physics. And still, even people like Nassim Haramein and many others in quantum physics say we still to this day do not actually know what energy is. And we do not actually know what mass is. We have definitions for them, but they're not proofs of, and they're not objective. They're just something that we agree upon. The reason this is so important is because when you really boil this down to the essence, religion and science are on the same footing. They don't have any objective evidence for what's behind everything. And therefore, they're both living myths, even though the scientists would shirk at that thought. But it's fact. I've looked into it very deeply. And you know very well how powerful a person's beliefs are in the shaping of their lives and how they attract things to themselves. And if your myth is ultimately your story, whether it be conscious or unconscious, it's probably the most powerful guiding influence in your life. And when you're dealing with psychology, we're talking about looking at disempowering beliefs and transforming them to empowering beliefs. We all know that if a person gets in the hands of a good Jungian analyst or a skilled psychologist, that you can take people from a state of depression and even being suicidal to finding themselves and becoming a whole person again, which really is a change in their myth. I asked you that just because a lot of the things you're talking about, the different questions that you offer for podcasters and sort of the gestalt really hinges itself on one's mythology. So I was just curious.
Our entire film, The Portal, which at the moment people can see that for free on our website, entertheportal.com. And the book that comes with that is an exploration into people's mythology. And
Great.
What it showcases, we researched 300 individual stories, and we selected 6 individual stories to show in that film. And each of those stories have a very deeply conditioned and challenging background in their story or backstory that was their current myth. And then they went through a crisis and they transformed going through that crisis. We focused on a tool, meditation, as the methodology for them to change their story. And what we see is this incredible pivotal shift from one story. I was, let's just say, Buddha, who grew up in a gang sort of environment, an African-American environment that was very challenging and very poor. And that kind of led him to this sort of storyline. And then he went through a sort of dark night of the soul, went through a big transformation, went through war, and eventually came out of that with his meditation. And now he's a successful actor. He's doing speaking. He's had this incredible transformation in his life. And the old story is not the current story. It's a change story. And we see that with all of the 6 stories. So it's all about individual storytelling that changes and metamorphoses. But what does that look like if we multiply that by 7 billion people that no longer are defined by their old story and they create a new story? And that's something that is becoming a really exciting proposition that we're starting to explore as a species, that we're starting to understand that we don't need to be defined by the old story, that we actually get to create the new story, but we need to know what that new story is that we want to create. And that transition point is the now, which is determining the future. And what you're becoming is something that you're crafting and constructing in today. And what happened in the past can be something that you can learn and grow from, but it doesn't have to be something that is a life sentence that continues to be what you're becoming. The past doesn't have to be what your future is either. And so that rewriting of myth, I think, is a really exciting area that we as a species are starting to really understand. And Daniel Schmachtenberger, one of the great minds in our film, he's a brilliant mind at the moment. I think one of the great minds on the planet. And he asked us as the producers of the film to invite audiences whenever we have one. So I guess I'm passing this on to you now and the people listening. He asked us to start to contemplate or invite the audience to contemplate what life would look like on an enlightened planet. And the reason why he asked us to do that is, he says, because there's no one that's a governing body or an organization that's in charge of leading us to an enlightened planet and designing a planet that has got enlightened people in it and that is for enlightened people. What does the school system look like? What is the education? What is the political system? What is the banking system? What is the the agricultural system? What is the pharmaceutical and the medical system? What do they all look like on an enlightened planet? And so he said, the first thing we can do is at least start to contemplate, like you said before, the idea first. So this is something for everyone listening into. What does it look like for you to be enlightened? And what does it look like for you to be in an enlightened planet in 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time? What do the systems look like? What do the structures of that society look like? They're going to be distinctly different than the current one, because the current one is built 200 years ago. The education system, the political system, the banking system, the medical system, everything was designed 200, 300, 500 years ago in a particular state of consciousness and from a particular state of consciousness. But as that state of consciousness changes in the collective and in the individual, then those systems will by default have to change. And we're already seeing the early stages of that. We've got crypto, we've got social media instead of media, we've got homeschooling and people looking for alternatives to schooling. We've got people looking for alternatives to
medicine
and farming. So and farming is interesting, doing the full circle now. It's going back to the original sort of methodologies
Thank
of farming.
God.
So that's something for us to explore, our own collective myth as far as us as a species. What does it look like in the future as we change our myth and look at our own individual story as well?
Well, that's actually exactly what my next question's about. But before I hit you with that one, I wanted to make a couple points. The process of healing is almost always inherent on consciously transforming our story into one that goes from a state of disempowerment or victimhood into one of self-empowerment and sovereignty and freedom. If you're dealing with a fall off a ladder and a broken bone, well, you can get through that orthopedic type issue. But when you're dealing with most chronic health issues like gut problems, mental problems, emotional problems, depression, any of the chronic ailments that get people, which I've worked with thousands of people on in my career, there's no way you can actually make an effective recovery, because those things are almost always a byproduct of the choices a person has made, and all choices are driven by beliefs. In order for me to do effective healing, I have to look at what are the beliefs, conscious or unconscious, that led to the choices that have led you to manifesting a disease as the byproduct or as the direct product of your own internal psychological and physiological process. And there's nothing more powerful to the function of our cells than our own mind and beliefs. We know that from lots of experiments and things like firewalks and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've done Tony Robbins' firewalk, and I can tell you for sure it's very, very real. But it's a miracle to me, even having done the firewalk, that the coals were 2,600 degrees. He had a thermometer in there, and I was standing right there looking at it. And human flesh cannot handle 2,600 degree heat. And this is like, it would be like walking from here to my stereo speaker back there, which is like 30, 35 feet across. It's not like you're just going one or two and jumping off. It's a full walk. And even standing next to them, the heat was so intense. It's like being next to a massive bonfire where it'll burn you. But when you put your mind in the state that you don't see yourself as walking on coals, but you condition your mind to believe you're walking on cool moss on a cool forest floor, your body goes right across. You don't get burnt. But during the firewalk, anybody who could not maintain that belief, cool moss, instantly got burnt. You could smell burning flesh everywhere. There was lots of people in the ambulance. But those of us that did it, it just felt like we were walking on, warm powder because of all the ash on top of the coals. So we know that our mind is extremely powerful. And I love what Schmachtenberger said about thinking about what would it be like to live on an enlightened planet. But what the thought that rose up to me while you were talking is the currency of enlightenment, no matter how it happens, is always love. So if we asked ourselves, what would a banking system look like that was rooted in love of honesty, truth, and the well-being of other people and the planet? What would medical system look like based in love? What would our education system look like based in love? I mean, if we really just asked ourselves, what would love do now for all the events in the world? And we could really stay in our heart instead of thinking about, how much money can I get at the expense of other people, ... I think we could shift into a much more enlightened state of living with that one move.
Yeah, I had a beautiful conversation with my auntie. My mother had passed earlier on this year, and my auntie, we flew her out from Albania. She's a 5 foot tall, 75-year-old Loretto nun, and she works in the space of human trafficking. She's been recognized by the United Nations, by the Pope, and by the King of England, the Queen of England at the time, I should say, and for her great work in really being at the forefront of change when it comes to human trafficking. But we're sitting around the campfire and we're talking about our meditation practices. You know, what do you do? What do I do? And she's a really deep thinker and a beautiful, loving person. She just exudes love. And she said something so profound. She said, my meditation is structured for an hour in the morning with my eyes closed on love. And then through the day and continuously throughout the day is really the contemplation of, am I the custodian of love? And am I representing love? I'm in a soup of love. Love is everything. And I'm working for love. I'm working from love. And to check in when she's forgetting that process and when she's forgetting to be the custodian and representative of love, and to remind herself of that. And it just really simplified everything down into, can my words, can my actions, can the things that I write, the things that I do be the representative? And if I remove myself from this picture and just let this vessel be the custodian and the representative of love, then it takes all the responsibility away from you and just gives it to love to be the thing that works through you. It was really powerful to hear her say those things.
I think love is innate in us, but as we get wounded, we lose our trust in love. We lose our sense of connection. And I think one of the saddest things is when people reach the point where they no longer love themselves. It's one of the most common questions I get from patients and students in my various programs is, how do I learn to love myself? Because I don't love myself. And so I spent a lot of time working with patients and students on how can you go about learning to love yourself? And oftentimes it has to do with forgiving others and forgiving yourself. Forgiveness is a very, very essential quality when it comes to reaching our capacity to give and receive love. And there's a lot of people that are good at giving love, but not good at receiving it. And that also creates health problems. Walter Russell in his teachings says that love has to be given and received in balance. And he calls that the love principle. And that if we give more love than we allow ourselves to receive, we create a deficit. If we receive more love when we give, then we create a deficit. We throw it out of balance. Healing is really part of it. But I think also we don't really have good teachings on love or how to love in our culture. We don't even have good definitions for love. I worked with my soul to come up with a definition of love, and I came up with 3 of them, but the one that I think is the best description is that love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or other. So love is the flow of energy and information through empathic, I feel, and compassionate, I understand, connection to oneself or to any other. And because the whole universe is made of nothing but energy, frequency, and information, then love has to be the flow of energy and information. And we all know that we feel more open and more alive in the presence of love, and that there is a definite frequency to love. It's a very elevating frequency. So I felt it was important for me to define that for my students and my patients so they could understand what it is that we mean when we say love. Because a lot of people have such negative associations after being hurt by love that I wanted to actually create some structure to a definition to get it out of the personal and more into something that was both personal and transpersonal.
That transpersonal is so important. I think we can work on a psychological level when it comes to understanding love, but I like to go deeper with my clients. When someone comes to me with that question, how do I learn to love myself? I said, you're still in duality there, because you're talking about you and love as 2 separate things.
Yes.
I need to love myself. And I said, if we take the I out, you'll discover that you just are love. And when we get you into a deeper, non-psychological understanding about yourself, but into an experiential understanding about yourself, transcending that ego identity, you'll discover that you don't need to love yourself. You need to realize that you are already love. And that if we talk about an omnipresent God, and then we look at the definition of God being really ultimately a lovingness, loving awareness, then we'll realize that the core essence of that individual is loving awareness. And so that It's not that you need to receive love. It's not that you need to love yourself. It's not that you need to love others. You need to just simply be the embodiment of love. And then everything from that will be lovingness. And you won't need to receive anything. Don't need to psychologically get around some disconnect, because you'll actually be in the connection of love and be in the soup of love. I find that's kind of like a shortcut to the healing process, to not have to heal something that's very difficult to heal, but to actually almost like dissolve the thing that needs the healing and discover that you're actually already it.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time for a person to be able to go from an intellectual conception of that to an actual experience of it. Otherwise, it becomes a great idea that's just working against another idea, because to have a non-dual realization of something requires what we described earlier, like a samadhi, but most people are too wound up and too caught up and too trapped in beliefs. The more love, for example, I tell people, look, if you're having a hard time loving yourself, just buy some nice plants for your house or tree and begin practicing connecting to them and talking to them and watering them, or really give some love to your dog or your cat and notice how it loves you back without any expectation. Because I find that human love relationships are often very complicated and challenging. But when we learn to love things like plants, trees, our food, and being grateful, just to be grateful, then we actually can learn to love safely and feel love safely. And then we have more trust and confidence in love. And I think that opens the door for more of these deeper transcendent experiences where we start to actually get glimpses of the fact that I think once you get deep enough into love, you have the benefit of knowing that only hurt people hurt other people. So it's easier to have empathy and compassion for them. But if you don't have that depth of understanding, then you can really get to the point where you just don't trust people anymore. And it's hard to feel safe giving or receiving love because you start expecting that it's going to come with pain. So those are just some of the key things. But I do have a question on non-dual stuff coming up. So we'll get to that too in a minute. My next thing I wanted to talk about with you is this. Tom, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, among others, made it clear that when a culture's myth breaks down, all hell breaks loose. There's an upsurge of isms that can be very dangerous, such as Nazism happening in Jung and Joseph Campbell's era. If you had to define what collective myth we're transitioning out of and what potential myth is emerging now as a counter myth, what would they be? The one we're coming out of and the one you think might be coming in as a counter myth to our cultural conundrum or cultural story that's leading to so many problems.
What I see developing is this intellectualization. We're becoming extremely cerebral. We think a lot, we talk a lot, we listen a lot, we read a lot. Everything is very top heavy and very intellectualized and centralized around the intelligence. We really pride ourselves on thinking. We overanalyze, we analyze, we forecast, we regret, we remember, and we're very, very much in our heads. And what this does is that it leads to overthinking, of course, and overthinking is overanalysis. And this, again, is where all the isms develop from the intellect.
You also get paralysis by analysis.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, there's a polarity in this intellectualization of us as a species, is that it leads to incredible developments in technology and in advancements that are really helping improve society in some ways. But it's also got the polarity of this incredible erosion of our connection to self, a connection to mythology of the past, to the mystical, because all of that doesn't exist in this overthinking state of mind. And I think this is the dilemma that we kind of pride ourselves on, particularly some of the hardest people I've had to work with are extremely intelligent people, because they're so caught up in their intellect. And the whole process of me teaching meditation is to actually transcend thought. The first stage, the first thing we do in my training program is get them to transcend the thinking mind and start to experience the reality of consciousness itself without thought. And that, for a person that's really obsessed about thinking, an incredibly intelligent person that prides on thought, is very, very challenging for them, because their identity is built around their intellect. As a collective society, this development and I guess this explosion in the thinking mind and the intellect, I think it's causing a lot of fracturing in our society, like that separation and segregation that's happening. My ideology is better than your ideology. My thoughts are better than your thoughts. My isms are better than your isms. And so I think this is part of the segmenting and the fracturing of our society. You know, we've seen it just recently in your elections in the USA, with such a polarization happening in your society between ideologies. And I think there's many benefits that come from the development of our intellect, but I think there's also a lot of problems that are developing from that, from basically the loss of all that storytelling and mythology as well.
So, do you have any sense of what the emerging myth might be collectively? Like, for example, James Hollis says that the myth that we're in is consumerism. Shop till you drop and medicate. If you don't feel good inside, go buy something, which is, of course, a materialistic myth because it's all based on medication with material objects.
Yeah, the current one we're in right now, which you can just look at any TV film, any TV drama, is simply this: the good things make me feel good and bad things make me feel bad. And if I can buy my way to good things, if I can experience my way to good things, then by default, I will feel good. So that we're in this sort of duality of subject and object phenomenon, which is what's driving consumerism. And what's driving an economic model built on commoditization and extraction, which is that if I can consume, if I can experience, then that will change my state. And the problem is with that is that we've lost sovereignty, because quite often what it emphasizes and what it proliferates is the idea that the external world is the source of my experience and the source of my well-being, the source of my happiness. And therefore, I need the external world to keep changing in a way that makes me feel good. But unfortunately, it doesn't do that, which means that I don't feel good a lot of the time because the external world doesn't work out how I want it to. So what I'm intent on doing, and it looks like you're intent on doing this as well, is to changing that myth in that my state is independent and sovereign regardless of the external world, regardless of my past, regardless of what someone says to me, regardless of whether the rain comes down on my picnic that I had planned, whether that the Uber driver that I had planned on turning up 3 minutes ago didn't turn up. I need to find a sovereign state that enables me to move through that world. And I know it's possible because I've seen it being experienced, and I know through my own personal experience that I'm becoming more and more sovereign regardless of circumstances of life, that my state is independent and self-referred rather than externally referred. And that's something that I would love to see humanity become more and more. The big thing that we got right now is this whole concept of being triggered. You've triggered me to be in this state. And that thing that I've just seen on my Instagram reel, or that thing that I heard someone say at the dinner party, has changed my state. So what we're seeing is this huge loss of sovereignty, and everyone's extremely sensitive and extremely fragile and extremely upended by the world around them. And this is, I think, a chronic disease that's happening on the planet right now. And we need to learn how to find that beautiful sense of equanimity and being able to independently observe the world without being completely discombobulated and thrown around by the world.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I imagine you know that magnesium is one of the minerals that people in North America are the most deficient in, but it's an extremely important mineral to have in your diet regularly. And believe it or not, Bioptimizers has improved what was already well known to be the best magnesium formula out there, called Magnesium Breakthrough. So I've got Wade Lightheart with me to explain what it is they've done to improve this already excellent formula. Wade, what is new about your new Mag Breakthrough formula?
Well, it's called sucrosomial magnesium. So we have 7 different types of magnesium in Magnesium Breakthrough because they're uptaken by different parts of the body. But a new type of magnesium has been created called sucrosomial. And what it shows in the research in science is that it's actually even more absorbable by the body, particularly inside of the brain, which is a big aspect to enhance neurotransmitter formation, as well as ensuring the rest and relax response in the nervous system that a lot of people will take magnesium for. They find it, clocks them down, helps them sleep better. allows for the relaxation of striated and smooth muscle tissue in the body, which creates an energetic relief. And so when we added sucrosomial, we were able to demonstrate inside our lab facility that we were able to get better improvements. Of course, we have a partnership with the Birch International University. We have some patents we're working on, which will kind of relay some of these things. But sucrosomial was a no-brainer when we added to the formula, improved the results or improved the uptake. And the reports back from our testing team were like, wow, we get more results with less caps. And that's always the goal for our company.
That's excellent. I love it. I always say, and people have probably heard me say it before, I'm so amazed how you guys are constantly and always improving and working your best to not only make better products for us, but it doesn't seem to me that it gets more expensive as you make them better. So that's a real gift to the world. Thank you.
Bioptimizers offers Living 4D with Paul Chek listeners 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough and all their other products. Plus, there are always amazing gifts with purchase. So to grab yours, go to bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code Paul10 when you check out. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4D, and the discount code is Paul10.
Yeah, I think that really boils down to what I call externalization of the self. I think if our sense of self is too much anchored in belief systems, ideologies, dogmas, groups, power, if somebody comes along and says, well, I don't like Christians because of all the problems that have happened through Christianity, then instead of being open to saying, well, yeah, let's explore that. That's a very interesting concept. They get very triggered and very reactive. It's kind of like saying you don't like people that have a certain color skin. Well, to overlook the fact that if you peel their skin off, they're just as human as you are, no matter what color their skin is. Whereas if we had more of an anchoring in our self as a unique expression of the divine and a unique gift to the world, and that we can make room for everybody else to have their own beliefs, and we were more anchored in our heart. Then someone says, well, like I had a guy write in one time, I was wearing this hat or one of my other hats like this, and he goes, I can't believe you did a podcast with such a stupid hat on. And I'm like, wow, that guy's missing the point of the 2.5 hours of great conversation, his only comment was on my stupid hat, right? So there's somebody who's so externalized that they're not even present with the deep wisdom and offerings of the podcast. One of Houston Smith's very powerful quotes, which I actually just shared on another podcast today with Father Sean O'Lear, was Houston Smith said, to the man who lives his life from his center, all tensions disappear. And I think if we really can anchor ourselves in the deeper truths of our common unity together. We're all human. We all breathe. We all need fresh water. We all need food. We all love music. We all need to clean, feed, nurture, and protect our children. I mean, we have so much more in common than we don't. If we put our orientation on the common things that we share and the beauty that we share, then these other things become so flimsy. We just make room for a person to not like your hat or not believe in your religion. Say, well, great. I hope you enjoy the one you're practicing, Point being is I think we've so externalized ourselves, which is part of this materialistic orientation, that we've lost touch with the fact that in the true center of our being, everyone's there. None of us is who we are without the relationships that created us, right? The soul is relationships top to bottom. And when we forget that, we also forget that sometimes it's the people that irritate us the most or challenge us the most that stimulate the most growth and self-realization in us. And sometimes we have to just say, oh, here's a chance for me to breathe, or a chance for me to acknowledge that's this person's belief system. It doesn't have to be mine. It doesn't even have to irritate me. I can say, well, I hope you're happy and that's working for you. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us all to grow through these different experiences, but we're at a time now where some of them are starting to create so much trouble, as you know, that we have to accelerate our focus, because some of these dualistic type things can lead to wars that are very destructive, as they already are. But you start throwing around nuclear weapons, and the end is too close for comfort.
Yeah, which is why the doomsday clock moved 90 seconds to midnight just only a few weeks ago.
Oh, did it really? I didn't know that. I forgot that they were still running that thing. It's been years since I heard about that.
Yeah, they gave it a little nudge the other day. So it's and based upon, I think, the escalation of, it was less on environment, which is definitely one of their influences, but it was more on the number of hotspots that are starting to appear on the planet with heat in those areas where there's access to nuclear weapons was the main reason for them to go from 2 minutes to 90 seconds.
Now, is the 2 minutes based on what's the scale of measurement?
I think they're looking at a number of different parameters that they see as a measurement for risk to extermination of the species.
I mean, how does the time, like, is it 2 minutes since humanity was born?
No,
or?
it's basically, yeah, it's a good question. Would they, I think it's the amount of time they feel we've got left to midnight, which is the doomsday. Obviously, that's the sort of the potential end to us as a species. And I don't know when it started at 15 minutes or 10 minutes to, but I'm not sure exactly where they get those measurements from. But I know that it was at 5 minutes, and then it got to 2 minutes, and now just recently got to 90 seconds.
One of the problems, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, if you study the structure stages of consciousness, such as Ken Wilber, Gene Gebser, or many others, whenever people are under stress, they automatically revert back to a lower structure stage of consciousness. So you saw, for example, during COVID, all sorts of holistic people and yogis and even famous people like Deepak and Jordan Peterson and even the Dalai Lama went out and got vaccinated. And you had all sorts of people from J.P. Sears to Russell Brand and many others, even Jordan Peterson, becoming Christians and born-again Christians. So you see this reversion, but there's a huge population of Christians that believe in Armageddon as the end of the world, and they're actually encouraging it. I've seen interviews with them right on television. I've seen interviews with people over in Israel saying, yes, this is the beginning of Armageddon. It's all going to end. Like they're actually trying to trigger a third world war because they think that's the prophecy of the Bible. Now, when you look at the effect of collective consciousness, when you get enough people believing something like that, they can actually manifest it. Just like if you have enough people praying for you, you can heal a lot faster, as research shows. One of the challenges that we all need to be aware of, and one of the reasons that should inspire us to pour as much love in the world, like my spiritual practice I've been working on for the past several months, because I've got my students doing it, so I want to do it with them. And it's something that I had been practicing, is I practice breathing through my heart. And as I breathe in, I visualize unconditional love entering me from every direction. And I see it as beautiful, green, vibrant light, or white light, or translucent light. So imagine the sun in reverse. Instead of being yang and shining out, it shines into its center. So I draw that love in, and then I open my heart as wide as I can. And as I exhale, I say the words, I give God's love to all beings. And then I breathe in, I breathe God's love into my being, and I visualize myself filling with love. And then I exhale, I give God's love to all beings, and I visualize myself shining love in every direction like the sun. And I think if enough of us do a practice like that, we can actually create a shift in the collective consciousness, and even this shift in the vibration in space-time itself. Point being is, if you've got enough people bringing on an Armageddon because they think that's what God wants because it's in the Bible, Armageddon doesn't mean the end. It means the end of a cycle. People just aren't deep enough to even know what they're reading, right? But I think as practices like that can all bring us all into a common practice, just like meditation does, and like most global projects that harmonize us do. That's important. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, imagine if 7 billion people, 7.6, 7.8 billion people did that meditation that you just took us through then every day. I mean, we would change the planet within days and weeks. That's how powerful. And it comes back to what Daniel Schmachterberger was saying, invite the audiences to contemplate what life would be like on an enlightened planet. So I'm always working with my clients to help them get clear on what are they becoming? What does that look like? What is the future version of yourself? What are you feeling? What are you vibrating at? What are you creating? How are you living your life? Because your mind is the manifester. Just like the architect has to design the plan of the house and the design of the house before it goes to the builder, and the builder starts building it. And like you said, you've got a whole planet thinking about Armageddon. There's a high probability that you're going to manifest that. But if we've got a whole planet of people giving love and exploring what life would look like on an enlightened planet, then we're going to start creating that as well. So these are all in the potential design of the future that we're actually in the middle of creating right now, which is the power of these discussions, the power of podcasts, the power of social media to now start to disseminate this information that was traditionally preserved in the jungles of South America or the mountaintops of Tibet and India.
Esoteric teachings.
Yeah, very esoteric teachings that were held and restored and preserved for thousands of years in very exclusive and remote places. And now we've got this incredible gift and capacity to share this with the world. And I see that this technological development that we've got right now, the fact that you're, like I said, in SoCal and I'm here in Australia and people are listening to this in the future, is part of, I think, the methodology for us evolving into a new, very different paradigm than the current one that we're in right now, which is very exciting.
Well, it's also a positive use of technology. I've said to people many times, do you realize that the same technology we've used to destroy the planet could be applied to healing the planet? And an example I give is, look, somebody came up with a brilliant idea. They worked in a lab and worked with bacteria and custom designed bacteria to eat an oil spill. And now they have bacteria that they can put in the ocean where there's been an oil spill, and it actually eats the oil up and cleans the ocean. So the same technologies that we're using, such as computers and phones and bomb making technology and chemical fertilizer technology and pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, rodenticides, glyphosate, all that genius just turned in the opposite direction. If we put the same amount of ingenuity and intelligence into using our technology to healing the planet, cleaning the water, cleaning the skies, creating better social systems, better education systems, we could create something absolutely so magnificent that beings from other dimensions would want to come hang out here, not because they're worried about us, but because they want to party with us.
Yeah, we cover in our film this idea of it was a group of people called the Loving AI Project. I think it was a bit of ahead of its time. And they had a humanoid called Sophia, and they had programmed Sophia to only be able to give unconditional love. And here's the thing is that exactly like you said, that the technology for AI could kill us, or it could actually proliferate the human experience and help us evolve and bootleg us upward. And again, it's not the technology that's the issue, it's how it's being used. And what is the state of mind of the programmer of that technology? What is the state of mind of the programmer of the creator of the glyphosates, and how we're going to use those sorts of things. So I think I always come back to the state of consciousness of the creators, and that's creators of humans. So what's the state of consciousness of the parent of the human that's going to program that human through their upbringing? What's the consciousness of the human that's programming the humans in the education department? What's the consciousness of the human that's creating technology at Google? What's the consciousness of the human that's creating guns and weapons in the US military? So it always comes back to that, the state of mind and state of consciousness of the creators.
I think, too, that you're pointing to something of a very, very deep concern that I have, and that is that, as you know, large corporations are constantly spying on us. They're using our phones, but they're using this data to program AI technologies. And what concerns me is with the power of AI and the concerns that AI experts have, that most people don't realize that when you are using the mass population of the world to program AI technologies, you're actually programming something that will have the same biases that we do. And this has been very well demonstrated. For example, somebody asked AI, tell me some of the negatives about Kamala Harris. This was before the election. And it wouldn't say anything about her. But then it said, tell me about some of the negative issues with Donald Trump. And it listed a whole row of them. So obviously, somebody who had an orientation toward the Biden administration had programmed the AI. Another one, somebody asked a question, tell me such and such about Jesus. and it said all sorts of stuff. But when they asked about Buddha or Lao Tzu, it didn't have anything to say. And so you see that we have a real problem because we're actually just taking our own biases and blind spots and programming it right into a computer that has no consciousness to differentiate whether what the information it's giving is harmonizing us and bringing us into a higher state of consciousness or basically mirroring our own pathology back at us. And I think that's where we need a very, very carefully constructed team of very enlightened, wise people to ultimately be the ones that make final decisions on what we do and do not use AI and nuclear weapons and advanced technologies for. But we don't have that. And that, the leaders of most countries have been studied and found to be psychopathic. And that's easily accessed research out there. You could read the book Control Oligarchs by Seamus Bruner. That'll blow your mind. It's an investigation into the people that are actually the most powerful globalists in the world, like Bill Gates, Soros, etc. And it shows they all had very traumatic childhoods and that they all fit the class of the psychological profile of a psychopath. And so these are the people that are actually running the world. And this is why we have a pandemic. And this is how it is that Bill Gates always seems to know, and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum always seem to know when a pandemic's going to hit before it happens. Well, how do you know that unless you're creating it, for God's sakes? And so if you get this kind of mentality into AI and AI starts taking over all of our systems, and as you know, it's already being used to program what people are watching, and it's reinforcing the biases that they want to drive. That's a very, very dangerous situation. In fact, I'll be interviewing Federico Fagan, who is one of the originators of computer technology and knows a lot about AI, tomorrow. And I'm going to ask him his thoughts on these things because I think they're extremely important.
Yeah, it's a really concerning situation that we're in when the technological advancements are accelerating so quickly beyond the human consciousness advancements. And that means that they're going to outstrip our capacity to rein them in. In the past, our human intelligent advancements were superseding technological advancements. We had the wheel, then we had the hammer. And human development was developing things because our mind was developing much more quickly. We had very intelligent minds, even going back in the Roman times. But now what we've got is technological advancements, whether it's weaponry or AI, superseding the development of human mind and human consciousness collectively. Then we're in a real spot of bother because there's no question about it now. The genie is out of the bottle, and you listen to Mo Gaudat talk about this, that the capacity for AI to self-learn and develop faster than the human can keep up with that is a point of return we're past now.
It is, and a number of experts have expressed what concerns me deeply, and that is that our technological advancements are about 15 levels of development ahead of our moral development.
Yeah.
By definition, a moral is a code of conduct that is life affirmative. And we're using very advanced technological developments. I mean, look at chemtrails, for God's sakes. I've recently seen documentaries showing that they're spraying pesticides all over, glyphosate all over national forests all over the world, in Germany and everywhere. I'm like, what is this? This is large corporations getting inside the government and using taxpayers' dollars to buy massive amounts of death chemicals to spray all over the planet just to make money, but without any focus on the consequences of that, or even asking themselves, where do I live and how am I going to feed my children? But they're so driven by materialistic pursuits and money that they don't even realize that they're actually funding their own death. The more successful they are, the closer to death we all get. We have a real crisis in morality and moral development, which is why I love the practice of breathing love, because it brings your vibration up. And even though you're not necessarily saying, like I'm going to try to be more loving to this person or more loving to that person, I think the more time you spend making love, the more you become saturated in love and the more your vibration raises. So morality actually becomes an emergent phenomenon of the process. In other words, you don't have to go take a class on morality. The fact that you breathe love and make love comes with the emergent property of being naturally more moral, because it's the inherent nature of love.
It becomes a byproduct, doesn't it?
It does, but that's not the case with mind. Mind is always a cutter. The alchemists called mind the logos cutter because all thoughts divide. And so when we keep working from the dualistic perspective of mind, we keep cutting. But when we work with love, we bring things together because love is ultimately what binds everything together in creation. Love is what holds an atom together. Love is what holds relationships together. Love holds companies together. Love holds nature together. Well, what makes me sad is that if we realize how much we love each other when we're dying and we're sitting in the afterlife looking at the world we've destroyed, the pain of that can be ineffable. And realizing that we were so close the whole time and all we had to do was just change our orientation from I to we and we to all, and realize how much we love and need each other. And, like I look at all this polarization and racism and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, how many of you don't love music from around the world? How many of you don't love Mexican food, Jamaican food, Chinese food, Japanese food? You watch movies that are made from all over the world. I mean, this is such a silly game people play. You actually are world centric in the way you live. Half the stuff you wear and drive and use is made in China. And even if you hate Chinese, you don't get rid of your car or the pen you're holding in your hand. So you're just playing a stupid game. And this is what happens when governments and globalists that are social engineers start programming people to create breakdown in the social fabric and in the family unit, which COVID was clearly designed to do, so that they can then restructure society the way they want it. But what it does is it actually destroys people's connection to each other, but most people aren't conscious enough to see what's happening. You see technology without morality. There you see leadership without empathy and compassion. And unfortunately, a lot of people that fell into that paid dearly. And sometimes it takes an event like that to bring us back into the realization, wow, maybe this threat wasn't so significant that I couldn't have slowed down and actually asked better questions before I just let fear take me over. This is why I tell my patients and my students, fear never makes a good seeing eye dog. You're better to slow down, breathe, and talk to people that know more than you and gather enough information to make an intelligent, informed decision. But when people start threatening your job and all this other stuff, people get scared and they act out of fear, and their consciousness drops down into survival mode. And that's never a right brain process. It's a left brain reflexive process. It's ready, fire, aim, not ready, aim, fire thinking. And that's how we destroy ourselves. I know you have thoughts on the relationship between non-dual reality and enlightenment. You alluded to that a little earlier. Would you like to share any more with regard to that before we move on?
Yeah, non-duality, we're starting to see this word non-dualism, non-duality, and non-dualists starting to emerge more and more. And the reason being is that humans are starting to catch up to, again, the science of the fundamental truth of a non-dual reality, that there is a unified field, that there is something that is not indistinguishably separated and segregated from that. But it's a subtle field, it's not a dense field. And that field is pervasive and permeating all reality. So we've got, like we said before, we've got mystics that have been talking about this unified experience, and anyone that's had a Samadhi experience in whatever methodology they've used, whether it's meditation, breath work, plant medicine, other modalities, will experience this melting away of their separate, segregated self. I was teaching some people on the weekend transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation. And in their second meditation, this gentleman came out of him and goes, he said he just had this sense that there was no I, there was no individual experience. There was just a profound, open, vast void of spaciousness. And I said, you're having a non-duality experience there, a non-dualist experience where you're starting to experience this pervasive field of subtlety. And it's so subtle, it's beyond form. And enlightenment really is the stabilization of that non-dual experience. And we know that it's there. It's like the clouds are individualized forms in the sky, but they're not the sky, they're in the sky. The wave is an individualized form that emerges from the vast field of oneness, which is the ocean. And the ocean is the ocean, whether there's a wave in it or not. And the sky is the sky, whether there's a cloud in it or not. And so the human is an experience of the unified field, and the unified field is there whether there's a human in it or not. So the unified field itself will continue to exist eternally. And amoebas come out of it, bacteria comes out of it, solar systems come out of it, quasars come out of it, and nuclear weapons come out of it. It all emerges from this field of formlessness, yet it is still something. It's still an intelligence, and it's an expression of the unmanifest into manifest.
Yes. I just wrote a note that I don't think many people think about what I'm about to say, but it is important to understand. And it's a bit of a paradox, but duality is essential for the conscious realization of unity. And so if you think of us as children, as a species growing up, I always tell my patients the pain teacher always shows up to show you where to pay more attention to the choices you're making and to give you more awareness of what you're creating. And I think if we look at the situation of the world, the pain teacher is showing up to say, hey, duality is actually there so that you can say I am, you can have an individual experience, you can make love, you can create, you can have children, you can have a family, you can build your dreams. But ultimately, the function of duality is so that we can look back into and become conscious of something that you can't be conscious of yourself in a fully non-dual state because there's no subject-object relationship. So you can think of non-duality like unconditional love. Well, it's unconditional. That's why, for example, I went into deep meditation. I asked my soul, please connect me to God conscious because I have an important question I want to ask. And my soul said, you are connected. And I said, God, why all the pain and suffering? If you are unconditional love, then why do you need a world full of all this pain and suffering? And the answer that came back to me was, I create conditions so that I can love myself unconditionally. In other words, God has to create a field of duality so that it has the ability to love itself unconditionally, because without the illusion of separation, there's no way for God to have the experience of being able to love what is ultimately itself, its own manifestation, like a parent loving its own child.
The Vedic perspective of that is the principle of Brahman. Brahman is the totality, and the totality in the Vedic worldview recognizes the unmanifest and manifest simultaneously. And the nivatattvam is to transcend where you are. So if you're in the non-dual, go into the dual. And if you're in the dual, then go into the non-dual and bring those two worlds simultaneously together. So experience the permanence and impermanence simultaneously, the manifest and the unmanifest simultaneously. That's the whole experience. Some people are just in the dual, which is going to be suffering, and just being in the non-dual is boring as anything. So the Brahman is the realization of non-dual and dual simultaneously, like you said. It's like God created those two things to have the dance, the playfulness of the unmanifest expressing itself in the manifest.
Yes. I think, for example, anyone that practices, as I was sharing, breathing unconditional love, consciously makes the choice, I am going to do this practice. There's the duality, I am going to do. But then you enter into the state of giving it out to the whole. So each time you open your heart and breathe to the whole, you're dropping duality and you're going into a unity state of consciousness, even if it's just for one half of the breath cycle. But what I find doing the practice and teaching it to people is they all of a sudden begin to have states of being very blissful and very connected and very, very expanded. So I think that we can use duality to enter non-duality. And as we do it, we become more conscious that it's really a state shift. Like a lot of people get triggered and get mad and they say, it's you pissed me off. But the reality of it is, no, they didn't piss you off. You allowed yourself to state shift, but it was your choice to be pissed off or not be pissed off, or to have empathy for them or not have empathy, etc. So I think because our Western culture lacks the depth of the Eastern religions, one of the beautiful things is that, Ram Dass really imported a lot of Eastern wisdom into the Western culture, and it's becoming more and more mainstream and more people talking about it and practicing it, and yoga's permeating the Western culture. It's almost like a race. Don't you think, Tom, that we're racing? Can we awaken to manage our destructive tendencies, or are the destructive tendencies going to get us first? And it's kind of like consciousness is over here and our choices and behaviors are over here. And as we grow in consciousness, then these dualistic tendencies dissolve. But as we grow in dualism, our consciousness diminishes. So it's kind of like, can we come to this point of self-realization where we can have an aha moment together and realize how amazing and how beautiful the opportunity that life is, but that we have to actually take responsibility for using the power of our God-given abilities to create and to manifest unity and love and respect for each other. You could summarize what's going on in the world to that very interesting race.
It is definitely a race, and it's an important race that we need to win, i.e., that is, consciousness prevails.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. One of the most amazing things we can do for ourselves is actually to get high-quality, raw, green, unprocessed vegetables into our body. And one of the things that I find amazing is Organifi's green juice. In fact, it's so amazing, I brought Drew Canoli, the creator of the product, to tell us what is unique about it. Drew, that is an amazing drink. How does it work? What does it do? Why is it so special?
Well, first of all, Paul, we went through 52 iterations to get the current formulation of green juice, and we're always increasing the value in it. One of the biggest things we did is we actually added 600 milligrams of ashwagandha, full spectrum. So it's a completely higher level of ashwagandha, which actually has been shown in clinicals, and we have dozens of clinicals on this, that has actually been shown to lower stress.
Yes.
Is the big thing.
Mm-hmm. Ashwagandha is something I've used for years, even with my clients for stress management.
Yep. So when you drink ashwagandha, it puts you in the green juice, it puts you in a meditative space. And we start at first thing in the morning drinking green juice. And because of the adaptogen in it, after 30 to 60 days of continual use, it makes such a big difference in your life. You're getting all the vegetables that are glyphosate residue free.
Yes.
They're organic, right? Highest quality that you could ever imagine. We got the spirulina and the chlorella, which is so important with all the different frequencies that are entering our environment today to help you detox from those.
Yes.
The green juice is bar none my favorite product at Organifi. And the best part about it is it tastes incredible.
Yes, it does. It's good. And I know my kids love it. So that's always the litmus test.
Yeah, it's like a matcha latte that you have first thing in the morning. And with the ashwagandha, lowering your stress, you feel it all day long. It gives you this internal wealth of energy.
It's just mixed with water. You mix it, and now is the green juice one you can mix with hot water, or is it best cold?
A lot of people actually prefer it with hot water. Some people will grab their favorite kind of oat milk or almond milk, something like that, and they'll add it to it. And we've gotten thousands of testimonials from all over the world. People start their day with green juice, and it makes such a big difference in their life.
Well, that's fantastic. So if you want to get your green juice, which I highly recommend, go to Organifi.com. That's Organifi, Organifi.com. And on checkout, Living 4D listeners get 20% off if you use the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. You will not be disappointed.
Love prevails. The sense of unity prevails. And like I said before, it's like 22 all with 3 minutes to go, or as the doomsday clock says, 90 seconds to go. And, we don't know who's going to win the game. But I do feel that, we're having this conversation about non-duality and about oneness and about unified fields. And this is something that thousands of people will listen to and relate to, understand, they will cognize it, they will have had their own experiences already. And that would not have happened if we look at a timeline of human evolution. That would not have happened 25 years ago. These conversations just didn't happen in an open forum like this with thousands of people listening to. The biggest environment for people to listen to information now is Joe Rogan's podcast.
Thank God.
Which is mind blowing that this is the main area that people are going to to listen to information. And in the past, only 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the only place people could devour knowledge or information was from a book, from a radio, from a magazine, from a newspaper, or from a TV. And now we've got podcasts and we've got Instagram reels and all sorts of signal channels and Telegram channels and all sorts of different ways to disseminate information, which is masses going to masses rather than oligarchy down to the masses. And so the movement of information is clearly defined that we're in a we generation, a we period now.
And it's that very technology that the globalists were using against us to try to force us into a pandemic and lockdowns that revealed the truth that they were censoring. So it's kind of funny that their own tool backfired on them. I love that. That's what you get.
And every time they try and shut down a channel, another one opens up. It's like a leak in a boat. That every time you put a finger in it, another one opens up. And you've got Substack and you've got Signal and Rumble and all sorts of channels just going, well, look, you can try and shut down this channel of information flow, but we're now past that point where you can stop the information flow of the masses moving intelligence and some of it might be disinformation. But who's not to say that, talking about disinformation, it's really fascinating. And I know the audience will relate to this and find this comical but absurd. There was a panel recently on ABC in Australia, which is our government TV channel. And the panel was sort of reassessing what happened with the pandemic and what can we take from it? What can we improve on it? Let's just say it's quite a left-wing sort of channel, which everyone would agree. And they had some doctors and some other people on the panel and then had the audience. And in the audience were people talking about the extreme adverse reactions that had. And one of them was actually a very recognized doctor in Australia that was talking about her, and she's married to a woman, her and her partner both got really extreme reactions. Now, they were very pro-vaccine before they got the vaccine, and they were actually recorded in national TV and national radio talking about why everyone should go out and get the vaccine. And then both of them had very adverse reactions to the vaccine and completely changed their tune and said there wasn't enough research, there wasn't enough warning, and that we really need to reassess the use of these vaccines. And they had clearly stated how extreme their reaction was from the vaccine. And yet there was a doctor on the panel that said, in his turn to talk about, he said, look, these vaccines are safe and effective. They just kept saying safe and effective.
Yeah,
safe and effective, safe and
called
effective.
brainwashed.
This is an intelligent person that had just heard very intelligent people talk about their adverse reactions. So not only was it not safe because there was clearly a side effect, and it wasn't effective because people kept getting COVID after they got the vaccine. And so it's really interesting to see when we talk about disinformation, and I get that there's some need to be awareness about the fact that we can just put out information and is it checked and is it regulated, and we need to check on that. But there's a lot of disinformation that's coming from government authorities and from the system itself, which is not being checked as well. So it's
more so.
More so, yeah, absolutely. How much disinformation is coming that's not checked and not being held up accountable for the information that they're putting out there. And the fact that they just kept using the mantra of safe and effective was clear that that was disinformation itself.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this in. There's lots I could say because I've studied this extensively. I have a lot of responsibility to famous athletes and wealthy people and movie stars. And my phone was ringing off the hook for months and months and all through this whole thing, asking me what I should do. So, I had to look very deeply into it. And fortunately, I have friends in high places and scientists and doctors and chemists and biochemists and everything else I have access to. So I was able to find out quite quickly what turned out to be exactly what is now the cream that's risen to the top. Like I tell people, the truth is like cream. It always rises to the top. So when in doubt, don't make a decision. Do what Jung calls hold the tension of the opposites. Just sit and wait. For example, I've had professional athletes contact me saying, Paul, if I don't get vaccinated, I'm going to lose my job. And I said, well, if you get dead, you're going to lose your job. If you get crippled or paralyzed, you're going to lose your job. So my suggestion is until all of us have the science and the statistics to determine whether or not this is safe or not, it's better to be without a job for a while, because at least then you can be intact, healthy, and whole. Many of them have thanked me very much for that because they did exactly that. And they've seen what do you do with 900 elite level athletes having heart attacks? That's never happened in the world's history, right? So, but really what we're talking about isn't so much about COVID. We're talking about how the mind can trap you and how we can get into fear states. And instead of going within ourselves and connecting to our soul or our heart and getting out of our head, which it's hard to do unless you practice. And I think this really comes down to why a committed spiritual practice of meditation or heart centering or anything that helps us grow out of duality into a sort of a non-dual relationship or a realization of the unity of all things. Until we can do that from our heart, our mind cannot be trained to think at this higher level of consciousness. You know, religion has not got us there. We've got thousands of years of religion and we're still killing each other and beating each other up. So I think we've got to go beyond religion. And I define spirituality as a progressively greater expansion of one's sense of wholeness, or a progressive connection to a larger sense of wholeness. And that's really what you're promoting. That's what we all need, right? When we reach the point where we're not seeing colors of skin or belief systems between us, but we're seeing God manifest in human form here to have an experience and learn how to love better, then it shifts us out of all this polarity. And it also makes us unwilling to engage it, to watch the garbage, to act it out, to buy it. You know, that's part of the race that you and I were talking about.
Yeah, my big motivation is to get people transcending. And what transcendence means is to go beyond, and go beyond in meditation means go into Samadhi, which is the fourth state, Turiya. And when we get out of the thinking mind and get out of our localized physical apparatus, the body, and get out of the sensations that move through the body, which is our emotions, when we transcend physical, mental, emotional, we now enter into a conscious awareness, which I believe is the spiritual. So spiritual has to be experiential, and it can't be conceptualized in the intellect. And interestingly, before you're talking about the thoughts and intellect, and Samadhi, really, ultimately, when we stop thinking, we actually find peace. And if you look at where peace lies on the love frequency chart, which is the vibrational hertz of sensations and feelings, where we've got shame and guilt down at 20 and 30 hertz, we've got love at 500, but peace is at 600 and enlightenment at 700 hertz. And so to get to peace, we have to have a cessation of thought. It's really quite interestingly. So the highest frequency can't be conceptualized intellectually. It has to be experiential. And how do we experience it? We remove the fluctuations of the mind, the judgments that you talked about before. And when we transcend, what we experience is a field of oneness, an interconnectivity. And we call this unity consciousness in the Vedic tradition. And unity consciousness, by default, when we're in unity consciousness, because we feel an interconnectivity, because it's experiential, we by default feel love for everything, because that is the essence and the soup of what unity consciousness is. So that's what motivates me, is to get people meditating, because then I know by default they start having these more profound experiences of unity.
Yeah, another thing I think is important to highlight in this regard is that non-dual state of consciousness or unity consciousness isn't something that you have to achieve like graduating from high school or getting a degree. It's inherently there.
That's right.
Without it, we would have no capacity to witness. We would have no field of subjectivity. Mark Goffney relates to it. He's not making the direct correlation between unity consciousness and what I'm about to say, but it ultimately turns out to be the same thing, which he says the field of value, right? So when we enter a non-dual state, we realize that the ultimate field of value is love and connection, not separation. We really have a values crisis, because when we worship ideas with greater fervor than the actual ramifications of the idea, the safe and effective choice, that's an idea, but that's not actually the truth. So if we worship an idea, but we don't look at what is the value that's behind that statement, such as, is it scientifically and rigorously evaluated? No, it's not at all. What kind of a value statement are you making when you have a vaccine that has no side effects listed and no ingredients listed, but you're supposed to take that on blind faith, and there's no research, and Pfizer tried to hide the documents for 75 years. So when we look at the concept of values, these are extremely low values. In fact, it's coercion, if it's anything. It's manipulation, it's coercion, it's lying, it's deceitful. If you were selling cars like that, they'd put you away in no time. They'd shut your business down. But somehow, miraculously, we can blanket the whole world with this kind of silliness. The point I'm making is non-dual states are inherently in us all the time. It's not like we've got to go anywhere. It's like you were saying earlier, we got to get out of the head. And this is why they say spiritually, the longest journey you'll ever take, or the journey enlightenment, is not long. It's only from your head to your heart. But for many people, it's the longest journey they'll ever take, even though it's only about a foot. If we get into the realization that it's really not about trying to achieve enlightenment, like, oh, I've got to do this, because then it makes people think, oh, I don't have time for that. It's another thing I got to do. It's really just about relaxing into the deepest truth of yourself. Paradoxically, it's a non-doing, right? It's not about doing, it's a non-doing.
It's a being.
It's being. For example, if you go from the state of moving, like I'm always trying to get something done, do this, do that, to be classically means not running. It doesn't mean chasing after the next big goal at work or whatever. Being is really more a state of presence, just presence, pure presence. And I think when we get too distracted and too externalized, we lose our sense of our own presence. And to the degree we lose our sense of presence within ourselves, we create a deficit in every relationship we have. For example, if Tom's 10% not present, there's 10% of Tom not there, there's 10% Paul can't access. So there's a 20% deficit in the relationship. So to really get into a state of being and being present with yourself, paradoxically, as duality drops away, because you're just in a state of presence, you just melt into that field of value or into that field of unity. And so the reason I'm sharing these words is I'm trying to inspire people to think, because a lot of people think meditation is some kind of hard work. They actually physically or psychologically are trying to stop their mind. I'm like, you don't understand meditation. Meditation is not about stopping a mind. A mind thinks like a wheel rolls. All you got to do is watch your mind without any need to keep perpetuating it and just be enamored by it and say, isn't that cute? Look at my mind. It's like a dog chasing tires. And eventually, when you get good enough at just practicing witnessing it, you stop energizing it, and then you have moments of unity. And it just all of a sudden, wow, you realize, wow, 30 minutes went by and I completely was gone into this state of beautiful, blissful emptiness. But you didn't have to do anything. So, when you get a world full of people that are tired and rushed, the thought of having to do something causes a knee-jerk reaction away from it. But what I encourage people to do is, look, how many of you wish you could just sit still and do nothing for 10 minutes? Well, almost everybody raises their hand. I say, well, good. Sit still, do nothing, and stop thinking about what you've got to do in 10 minutes. And if your mind starts going, simply step back from it and watch it, because now you're actually going into the state of the witness, which means you're sitting right on the box of non-duality, metaphorically, because if you're watching the duality, you're watching it from non-duality. So recognize that and say, oh, this is cool.
We use a mantra in the Vedic tradition to simplify that process. The mantra is a primordial resonance or vibration. Many people would know listening in that it's another pathway into that transcendent experience, and that there's the observational methodology that you talked about, which is observing, and then there's just that repetition of the mantra to take you deeper. Both of them are profound and beautiful.
Yeah, and on that, I love mantras, and I've been using them for many, many years. And are you familiar with Diva Pramal and her husband Meetin?
Yeah.
They actually have a beautiful little course on mantra, which you can get right on Amazon. So if anyone wants to practice some mantra and learn the science of how mantra works, just search Diva Pramal and Meetin. I can't remember how you spell Meetin, but any of the CDs by both of them will have his spelling, and you'll be able to find that because it is right on Amazon. I bought it there. I came across it one day by accident. Went, wow, I never even knew this was out here. And it was really beautiful. So that's a tip for all of you out there if you want to really have a nice little explanation of mantra. And of course, Diva Pramal and Meetin are masters of mantra. My God, I love their music. It's
so beautiful.
Really take you into that field of love. Amazing people. I mean, we need more people like that having more airtime,
That's right. It's not the platforms, it's what's on the platforms that's the problem.
Exactly. Well, look, Tom, I could talk to you forever, but It's at the time of day where I got to go get some water out of my water charger and load the house up and get ready to give the kids a little visit. So it's been a great dialogue. I'm grateful that I came across your marketing agent's little piece, and I looked at as soon as I saw the suggested questions, I went, oh, okay, well, this is my kind of conversation. This is what we need to have more of. So before we say goodbye, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share, websites, resources, offerings, or just whatever you'd like to share as we close the podcast?
Thanks. Look, it's been amazing. Like you said, if we could have more conversations like this, then the world's going to be a better place rather than talking about who's going to win the latest gridiron game or, elections and all sorts of stuff. So it's really beautiful to have deep and meaningful conversations. And I'd love to hear from people. They can reach out to me. My main point of contact is Instagram. I really find that as a useful place and a great messaging platform. So I'm at Tom Cronin, just one word, TomCronin. And my website is tomcronin.com if you want to find out more about upcoming retreats. We'll be in America in July, which I'm really excited about. We'll be running a retreat. Looks like it'll probably be in Austin, Texas. So looking forward to hopefully meeting some people over in the USA and bringing our tools and techniques to the world there in Dubai and in Bali as well throughout the year. But I think the one thing I want to leave everyone with is this, that I expect we're going to have some really difficult and challenging times on the horizon in some way, shape or form. And whether that's a personal or it's a collective challenge that you're going through, one thing I've learned over many years of studying this, that these are catalysts for change. These are progressive moments in time. They're not to be looked at as something that we run from. They're not to be looked at as something that we're a victim of. They're actually something that is actually self-perpetuating our own evolution. And if we can just look deeper into them, just sit with them, and whether it's a collective or an individual, like I said, those issues, those challenges, what is it that we can do to adapt, evolve, and grow? Because it's our adaptive capacity that will see us evolve and get us on track for that 22 all. Maybe it ends up becoming 23, 22, and we kick the goal in the last sort of couple of minutes, and we get across the line and we win the game. So I think that's the main thing, is to not look at the problems and the challenges of life as something that we're a victim to, but to see them as an opportunity for us to grow and evolve and learn from.
Well, thank you, Tom. I really appreciate your time and all the effort you made. I wrote down the website for your documentary, ENTER, the
portal.
I'll check it out for sure. I love that kind of stuff. Anybody that I can find that inspires me, I'm into it. So I'll say thank you to you, Tom, and I'm going to say thank you to all of you guys listening. It's been a great journey. I know if you've been listening, you're probably aligned with what we're trying to share here and see the importance of it, and are probably already making great strides to being the change the world needs now. So thank you for all of you. Thank you to my sponsors for all your love and support. Anything that you buy from the sponsors supports biodynamic farmers, organic farmers, the earth, the environment. My sponsors are all people that make amazing products that are super high quality that I use, my family uses. So you win, they win. A little commission goes to the podcast to support me, so we all win. I look forward to sharing something super exciting and interesting with you next week. So as I say goodbye, I will say, remember, we are safe, we are home, we are whole. Aho, Great Spirit. It is done, it is done, it is done. Thanks again, Tom.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me along.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Tom Cronin. Tom will be holding a live Q&A session exclusively for members of Paul's Spirit Gym podcast membership. If you'd like to take part in this opportunity, you can subscribe by going to paulchek.com/podcast. With your membership, you also get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul and other guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. Your support helps keep the show running and allows us to bring you even better content. So if you're ready to dive deeper and unlock all these amazing extras and participate in the live Q&A with Tom, head over to paulchek.com/podcast and become a Spirit Gym podcast member today. You can find information on Tom's programs and retreats online at tomcronin.com. The website for his film and companion book is entertheportal.com, and you can also connect with him on social media, on Facebook at Tom Cronin Meditation, on Instagram at Tom Cronin, on X at Tom_Cronin, and on LinkedIn at Tom Cronin1. His YouTube channel for the Stillness Project is on youtube.com/user/stillness project. Be sure to check out his upcoming alchemy retreats in the USA and Australia at bit.ly/alchemyusa. That's bit.ly/alchemyusa and bit.ly/alchemyaustralia. Also, Tom's Zen Academy coaching for spiritual leaders is available at bit.ly/zen-academy. And his Vedic meditation Zoom course you can find online at bit.ly/Vedic meditation course. Tom's books, including Deep Calm, a practical guide to stop anxiety and panic, are available on Amazon.com. All these links you can find on the show notes page, along with details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog at paulchek.com/podcast. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.